Awesome. So yeah, so we'll move on to ergonomics. And a lot of this you'll see like, kind of pairs a lot with what Maya was talking about as well. So these, we've combined our two fields for good reason. So just for starters, I want to cover ergonomics actually is. People will say this word in a lot of creative different ways. But the way that I like to think about ergonomics is basically the relationship between the worker, the workplace, and the activity, the tasks, the tools, and the worker, however you want to put it. Basically, we want these three elements to be balanced and in harmony in order for you to effectively do your work in, a healthy and safe way. If there is any mismatch between one of those three elements, that's when you're going to risk things like injury, not doing the activity well, or damaging the equipment. Those last two things are less of our concern. We're more concerned about you and your health and safety. But this is generally how I like to think about ergonomics. So these, anytime you have an imbalance between these three elements, you're going to put yourself at risk for some type of injury. This is called a repetitive strain injury. You may have heard about it, an RSI. A lot of times RSIs are made up of things like carpal tunnel syndrome, slip disc, low back pain, tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, any issues with like the wrist or tension headaches. So really RSIs kind of go from head to toe. It can be anything. So the key to making sure that you're protecting yourself from developing an RSI is to watch out for repetition. It's right there in the name, repetitive strain injury. So we want to make sure that we're giving you the correct tools before you're developing any of these issues to make sure that you're not developing these. So we want to really make sure that we're getting to you early on and getting that proactive kind of thinking going ahead of time. So let's move on. There we go. So these are many of the different factors that can contribute to an RSI. Poor lighting, awkward positioning, prolonged static positioning, meaning you're just not getting up very often out of your seat, repetition, doing the same thing over and over again, excessive force, contact stress. Contact stress just means something's physically touching your body, like maybe you're resting your elbow on an armrest, or maybe your wrist is resting on the edge of the desk, and of course, poor posture. So things can all come together to create a repetitive strain injury. So for the next writing prompt, I just want you to take, the next 30 seconds, look at this list and think about some of the ways that these elements might impact you in your day-to-day. Poor lighting could be something like not enough lighting when you're working with paper documents, or possibly fluorescent lighting overhead that's causing eye strain. Awkward positions, maybe your desk is too high or your keyboard is not positioned correctly. Prolonged static positions, like Jacob mentioned, maybe you are having some trouble remembering to get up out of your seat throughout the day and you're sitting there for like the whole morning. Repetition, a lot of people I work with will heavily, and just that repeated clicking over and over can be a source of concern. Excessive force, you're grasping the mouse too hard or you're grasping your phone. That's another thing that people tend to do a lot. Contact stress, like you said, maybe you're resting your wrist against the desk edge. And then poor posture. Of course, if you don't have a supportive chair, or if it's just not adjusted correctly, that can lead to some poor posture. So take a few seconds to just think about this, reflect on this, and if there is anything in particular that you're struggling with, you can go ahead and maybe leave a comment there so that we can all kind of share that a little bit. So the first thing that I want to talk about now that I kind of primed you for thinking about these different risk factors is heights. If I were to kind of isolate one thing that I would leave you with ergonomics that will make a huge impact for health and safety and comfort, it's just making sure that the height of your workspace is in the correct place. So I'm going to go to a little illustration here. So this is my little go-to illustration that I leave basically at the end of every report that I do and that I refer to in these kinds of webinars. And it just gives a really brief overview of how we want things to be positioned. It doesn't go over everything, but it does give you a good place to start. So if your desk is a fixed height, which is the case for a lot of people, especially when you're working from home, that's the height that we're going to have to work with. There are ways to either, adjust your height around the desk height, or to install other items to change the desk height. But for the most part, if you have a desk height that doesn't change, that's going to be our limiting factor. We're going to have to work around that. If, however, you have like a sit-to-stand desk or a keyboard tray attached to your desk, then we have a little more flexibility with positioning. So the way that I like to adjust desks when I'm doing a one-on-one ergonomic evaluation is I start with the chair, then move on to the desk, and then do monitors last. So the first thing you have is a good base of support. You want to have your feet either on the floor or supported on a footrest. You never want to have your feet dangling. That's going to kind of force you into a position where you're either sliding under your seat a little bit, or more likely you're going to end up perching your feet on the casters of the chair, which is going to have impacts for your posture and is not a great position to have throughout the day. So we do want to make sure you have some good support there. Additionally, you want to adjust your chair so that your hips are a little higher than your knees. Anytime the hips are higher than the knees, it's going to help reduce pressure on the hips and the low back. So if that's something in particular that you're having trouble with, that's the first place I would look, is make sure your knees are not, elevating above your hips. The next thing to look at is desk height. So you always want to make sure that the desk is just a little bit below the level of your elbow, so that your elbow can be about at a 90 to 100-degree bend. And this allows you to have relaxed shoulders, relaxed elbows at your sides, and an overall position of about 90 to 100 degrees elbow. So like we talked about, if your desk is not adjustable, you're either going to need to get a keyboard tray, have some sort of sit to stand feature with your desk, or use a footrest that will allow you to then boost yourself up a little bit if the desk is too high. So there's several things you can do there. And then lastly, with the monitor height, you want to ensure that the monitors are about arm's length distance away, give or take a couple of inches, and you want to make sure that the top of the screen is level with your eyes. The reason for that, this is not an arbitrary thing, the reason for that is because our gaze naturally wants to go downward at about a 15 to 20-degree angle. So when your eyes are nice and relaxed and you have the monitors positioned correctly, your eyes are naturally going to be looking right at the center of the screen. So we just want to do everything we can to set up your workspace so that your body can do what it naturally wants to do. So now that we've gotten, for the most part, the physical space set up, we want to know how to interact with it. The most key thing to ensuring that you're working and throughout the day ergonomically and getting the most use out of your well set up workspace is to make sure that you are limiting repetition and limiting prolonged static position. Even when you're in the most perfect, like picture perfect, textbook perfect position, if you're not getting up out of that position throughout the day, that's going to cause issues. So you want to make sure that you are changing things up from time to time so that you're not increasing fatigue, increasing strain, and increasing stiffness. So I would recommend standing, walking, or getting up from your chair about twice per hour. Even something simple as getting up to go throw something away in the garbage can works. Getting up to go talk to a colleague works. It doesn't have to be walking around the whole block or doing like a whole exercise routine. Nobody really has time for that anyway. So anything minor definitely counts. Another really great tip, and this is something that I've gotten more used to recommending as I actually have started doing it myself, is to mouse with your non-dominant hand. If you find that you have a job that demands that you mouse quite a bit and you're starting to have like some tension, some pain, or something uncomfortable going on with your dominant arm, to switch over to the left side at least some of the time. There are so many different types of even with like the most incredible mouse, if you're still using your right hand, it's really going to still cause injury on the right side. So that's one of my favorite recommendations nowadays. And actually, I mouse on my left almost exclusively now after having an injury of tennis elbow on my right side. And then the other thing you want to keep in mind, again, is to increase postural variability. So switching between sitting upright, reclining back in your chair, using a footrest, not using a footrest, standing if you have that option, or standing with one leg on a footrest, which also helps your low back. Those are all great positions. So use whatever you have available to just get that variation, that postural variability throughout the day. And then a last really but very important tip is to, as much as possible, avoid working on your laptop. There's really no good way to use your laptop ergonomically. It's just, and I know probably a lot of us are on them right now, but you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. The exceptions being like if you're on a Zoom call and you're not like actively typing and mousing, it's fine. Or if you're reading something and just viewing the screen, it's probably fine. And same thing goes for the phone. You know, you don't want to be relying on your phone really heavily. So the way I like to think about it is, you know, standard desktop setup would be that's the gold standard and that's what you want to try to work out as much as possible. Laptop is definitely not good, but it's slightly better than the phone. So kind of think about it in
Kelly,
that hierarchy.
will you repeat? You said standard setup, like gold standard is what?
Yes, so desktop setup. So basically you would want to have the, you know, separate monitors or laptop up on a laptop stand, something like that, keyboard and a mouse. And that's what I would consider like kind of a basic setup, you know, even if it's not the most ergonomic tool.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, so you wanna try to limit that. Like let's say you're traveling. I typically will bring a little foldable keyboard as well as a little travel mouse with me wherever I go. And I don't need a laptop stand because I usually have a backpack or something. I can just, you know, pop the laptop on that. So so think about, you know, what you want to travel with. So that brings us to another writing prompt. I just want you to think a little bit about what we've talked about and what one thing would be that you have learned so far, either for myself or for Maya, that you can improve on and utilize today. So just give you like a minute or two to think about that a little bit. And if you think of anything that you want to share with us, please feel free to put that in the comments.
As we have one moment, you know, I always have to jump in every now and then. And I have to say, you know, thank you both. No one, this almost feels like this should be required learning to be a grown-up. Because nobody talks about this and we all just suffer. And we suffer by ourselves and then we just try to work harder because we're suffering. So thank you both so much.
Yeah, we're so glad to be here. Kelly, I'm realizing I love your advice on like having a foldable keyboard and like I often will not go work at a cafe because I'm like, I don't have my setup and I'm gonna feel so icky. So I love that. And Brian, is one of the things I love about Stoked is this mission to like also bring together like peers and coworkers to support each other in a peer setting around like putting some of these into action. So we encourage you to actually, this is a great segue into our lifestyle. Kelly, do you want to wrap up your prompt at all or should I go into lifestyle?
No, I say you go ahead. I just saw that Lana popped up with stop working on my laptop in bed, which is something I struggle with. So I'm not like doing all the right things, but I'm just aware of them.
Or come up with a better ergonomic setup to work with your laptop in bed, right? Like find a way to prop your laptop high enough and have a keyboard on your lap.